I will give the floor to Cristina Mosselaghe. Just to give a little background, Cristina has supervised and edited the whole report in general, together with other group of people, but in particular we worked together on the entry on South Africa. That was the model that has been used for the preparation of the report. So we circulated a South African report first, and out of the South African report, that was in a way the framework for the elaboration of the methodological approach we tried to give to the whole report. That is, focusing on the different layers of law, stratigraphy, focusing and discussing the issue of the relation within the political order and the legal system, professionalism, and then, of course, it was enriched by all the political economy parts. But, so I figured that also in this discussion, we start with South Africa, so we start from the end. We like to be on the last part. So South Africa first, then I will follow Brics in order. So we'll go after South Africa. I'm going to do Brazil and follow the order because it's easier. But South Africa first, Cristina. Cristina is a PhD graduate from the University of Turin, is a IUC graduate from the LLM and Master of Science. She's currently working as, I think, a scientific advisor or director at the INET, Institute for Economic Policy in New York City. She's also in the faculty of the UGO since a long time. She's been with us now for many years, and we're very fortunate to have Cristina with us. You have the floor. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Professor Mattei. And so I'd like to say thank you so much to you for organizing this event, but also to Professor Liu for bringing this all together and seeing it to fruition. I'd also like to say thank you to Professor Tong, who's here from NYU Shanghai, and really to see old and new friends who are here from previous IUC years and were able to join us this morning, and it really is very exciting. I was part of the IUC class of 2018, and so I still feel like a student at heart in a lot of ways, but it's really good to be here this morning. As we're going to get into the different reports, and specifically I'll present on South Africa, I just want to first acknowledge this year's class of 2025. Is there a bit of an echo? Let's try again. Let's see which one. Is that better? Is that marginally better? Marginally better. Okay, so I also don't want to have unnecessary feedback, so please do let me know if I'm being too harsh on your ears. I want to be kind to you this morning. But as I said, thank you so much to Professor Mattei, to Professor Liu, Professor Tong, and old and new friends, previous IUC reunion who's here, and so it's really exciting to be able to be together. And then a specific thank you to the IUC class of 2025 who prepared these reports, and it was really their tireless work, despite the many classes, the many courses that they have, and the unbearable heat in putting together these reports. And so we're very happy that this can be the foundation for discussions that will continue hopefully beyond today as well. In the very few 10 minutes that I have, that I was told by UGO, 10, well, let's see how far we get. A loose construct of 10 minutes. I will basically try to do four things. So I'll basically give an introduction in terms of the way in which we applied the three patterns of law framework that Professor Mattei developed to the South African context. I'll look at the political and economic situation of South Africa, and then at the end perhaps give some concluding remarks on how I perceive the role of South Africa within the Brics countries. And so, as Professor Mattei said earlier this morning, we used the three patterns of law framework to try to get away from this sort of, understanding of just, civilian common law tradition as sort of a blanket taxonomy to try fit in contexts that don't quite match that particular reality. And the few patterns of law is just to give an extra layer of history and understanding the nuance within each country. In the South African context, traditional taxonomy were considered a mixed legal system because of the presence of the Roman Dutch law as well as English common law, but we also have the customary law of the different indigenous peoples within within the country. Maybe just to give you a little bit of context on that as well, we have 11 official languages, and so it gives you a sense of like the many different people groups and the different systems and customary laws that exist within those different people groups. And how do you then sort of reconcile those very different in some instances, contradictory ideas of law and society. And so we looked at the three patterns of law framework more from a historical perspective, that different moments in history perhaps had a more dominant pattern than others. And this is not to say that, the other patterns weren't in existence, sort of competing for prominence in that particular moment, but we can see very dominant aspects. So for example, in sort of the pre-colonial into the colonial phase, you can see the rule of traditional law being quite dominant. And then as we move into 1948, but perhaps even from about 1910, 1948 was when apartheid began. And so I don't want to assume that everybody knows what apartheid is, but it was state legislated segregation. The word apartheid means to be separate and sort of a state of being, separateness. And this is basically when the government divided the entire population group into racial groups. So you had black, white, colored, which is mixed race, and Indian or Asian a little bit later on. And each of these different groups were legislated into different areas. So this room, for example, would have been illegal, because it would have been illegal to have a black person, a white person, an Indian person, Asian person sitting on the same panel engaging in a dialogue in this particular way. And so it just gives you a sense of the way in which apartheid really legislated every single aspect of both personal and professional life, or both personal and public life. And this began from 1948, and in that particular moment, we can see that the rule of political will was perhaps more dominant, because there was a principle of parliamentary sovereignty, and so whatever was legislated had to be administered by the court. And so there was very little room for discretion, very little room for judges to try and interpret the law outside of what was written in the law. And so that particular moment is very much dominated by the politics of apartheid and the politics of racial segregation. Now, as we move forward in 1994, as most people should be aware, we then had democracy with the end of apartheid and the African National Congress coming into power with Nelson Mandela as the first president. And it marked the end, to a large extent, I think, sort of, if we think of a watershed moment in history, the end of apartheid and then the beginning of a constitutional democracy and sort of a new way of doing things. And so in that particular moment, you could say that we shifted from a very dominant political rule of political law to a more dominant rule of professional law. And so in this era, you have constitutional lawyers and various others who are, developing, whether it be the Bill of Rights, the first constitutional court case was on the right to life, and so trying to flesh out what does it mean to have the right to life, and in that sense, abolishing the death penalty. And so you can see a very active professional rule of law, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it, within that sort of in the post-apartheid period. And so I guess that's how we sort of try to look at the three patterns of law within the South African context. Again, it's not perfect, but it tries to give a little bit more of a historical nuance and trying to pick up on specific moments in history that have obviously then shaped what we have now in the South African legal system, which is very much a historical artifact. And so keeping that in mind for the discussions that we will have later on. In terms of the political situation in South Africa, it's been a very interesting period since 1994. We could go into quite a lot of detail, which is in the report, but maybe just perhaps to spare you and get to perhaps in this particular moment, the African National Congress was the first political party to step into power with Nelson Mandela, and they have maintained majority pretty much in the past 30 years. But this last election in 2024 was the first moment in which they didn't secure the majority in the National Assembly, and they were now forced to form what was called the Government of National Unity. And so now for the first time in history, we're seeing that the ruling party has to really negotiate with other opposition parties in order to pass anything through Parliament. And so we'll see, I guess, in the next 3 years whether or not that'll be fruitful or whether or not that will end up being a complete disaster. But at least for now, we can see that there's definitely a holding of the political institutions, there's definitely a holding of an understanding that we need each other to be able to negotiate and figure out what a future for everyone looks like. And so at the very least, the Government of National Unity was able to come to that agreement despite very different constituency bases and very different interests. And so I think this is a very interesting and key moment within the South African political scene right now, with being able to maintain somehow this Government of National Unity. But if you want to be entertained, please check out our news, because this is not a perfect situation, and there's always some flare-up here and there. But nonetheless, the Government of National Unity still holds, and so we'll be grateful for that. Economically, South Africa has obviously struggled I think in terms of, in relation to the rest of the BRICS countries, the original BRICS countries, it suffers significantly. We have vast inequality. We're conversing with a colleague yesterday that Brazil and South Africa seem to have a bit of a competition on who can have the worst inequality, unfortunately. But we still struggle with the vast difference between those who have and those who do not. And so this is a really important aspect in terms of redressing and transforming South Africa into a more equal and democratic society, and this is really key for us. Unemployment is also quite staggering. We're now hovering at the 33% mark at the beginning of 2025. We're at about 32.9%. Particularly youth unemployment is a significant issue, with I think 60% of the youth between 15 to 24 is unemployed, and so that is a significant concern for the future generations, which I consider myself part of, and so that is something that we are very concerned about. And then lastly, the energy crisis, I think, is something that a lot of people would have seen. We have scheduled load sheddings, and for those who do not know what a load shedding is, we have organized chaos in some sense, where we have a set schedule where we will not have power. So in different areas, depending on the power grid in that area, you might have blackouts for 4 to 8 hours, depending on which stage of load shedding we're at. And now this is obviously significant if we're thinking of any production goals going forward. And so this is something that the South African government is trying to address, but in a lot of ways a little too late, because we're already feeling the terrible impact of having such vast load sheddings, especially in the centers of commerce, for example, which would be Johannesburg particularly. All right, and then lastly, and I'm hoping I am keeping to time, lastly, I guess, and this is sort of, in discussion with everyone else within this room, thinking through the role of South Africa in BRICS. I think we've already discussed that South Africa is not necessarily, within the BRICS context, a massive economic player, but it is the second largest economy within the African continent, and so in some sense, it has some geopolitical pull within the African continent, which I think is very important. But interestingly enough, in this particular moment, President Cyril Ramaphosa, he was one of the key negotiators with the National Party coming out of apartheid into democracy. And so what's interesting about him is that he was already an expert negotiator within that period in transitioning us out of what could have been a very terrible and possibly brutal transition of the government. But he was quite instrumental in being able to bridge different people, different ideas, and being able to sort of come to a consensus that was reached, and the new South Africa was able to be successfully formed. And he's now currently our president. And it's interesting that within the BRICS, he seems to be playing this sort of diplomatic mediating role quite significantly, and trying to bridge different people and different gaps, whether it be being able to go to Russia and trying to discuss with Putin and sort of having discussions and mediating in that sense. We've seen him do that, whether it be South Africa taking Israel to the ICJ, for example. There's all these sort of roles that South Africa is playing and trying to intervene on the international level, and also trying to mediate on behalf perhaps of those who are not able to do so themselves, or who are not given a voice on that international platform, and at the same time within the BRICS themselves being able to sort of bridge very different ideas. And I guess it brings me to the last point, which I would say perceive that South Africa plays, is that we're familiar with diversity. With 11 official languages, multiple people groups, and the very, nuanced character of what South Africa is, we are very familiar with being able to bridge different ideas and being able to understand different contexts. And I think this, specifically with the BRICS, is important because the countries are so vastly different. I think when we began the reports, there was a little bit of a panic moment, because we thought, would we ever, sort of really try find some sort of commonalities or understanding between the different countries? And we're starting to see that if we can, like Professor Mattei said earlier, not coming from a perspective of imposing our ideas on the next person, and being able to receive each country on the basis and on the terms on which they present themselves, that we're already a step ahead in terms of trying to form meaningful cooperations and partnerships that can last. I did appreciate what Professor UGO said, coalitions of the willing. And I think South Africa is, at least in terms of its very short history in the past 30 years, has been slowly building up the traction of forming these cooperations of the willing, and being able to bridge very different cultures, languages, and hopefully countries within a BRICS coalition that will work in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. This was very, very interesting, and if I can say, it gives an insight on something we should keep in mind, because the rule of law or legal professionalism has been the ideology of neoliberal domination and of neoliberal reaction in certain places. So the way in which legal professional arrives and whether a given legal culture of the country is capable to digest it and to make it with local characteristics is extremely important. And South Africa seems to me, we will see other examples. Certainly, after the Constitution, there was this massive interest of Western, predators, basically, to go out there with, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and structural reforms and comprehensive development plans and privatizations and all of that for a while. And that was really kind of the clothing of neoliberalism. And it seems to me that South Africa has been able, in a way, at least to resist it in part, thanks to the cosmopolitanism of its legal culture, but also never give up the idea that international law can be reconstructed. Bringing Israel in front of the International Court of Justice, to me, was a very important sign that Brics countries, before considering the creation of new international institutions, are kind of willing to try to make work those that we have. So that would be, I think, thank you very much for this this presentation. Now, I will go back to the order. So I would have Mariella speak about Brazil, and then we follow from red perspective. Mariella Pitari is, also has a PhD from the University of Torino. She is in the Public Defender Office of Brazil, I think the federal one. And she's been a postdoc fellow in Holland, and right now she's in the Turin faculty, and she's a dear friend of ours. Thank you, Mariella, for being here with us.
Thank you so much, Professor UGO. Thank you, everyone, to be here. I feel very proud and very honored to be part of this alumni meeting in this occasion to discuss the Brics Forum at the same time that in Brazil the Sherpas meeting is happening. So it's a very important moment to share new ideas, to try to draft new patterns of law that are different from the functional Western civil law, common law tradition, this divide. So I will try to provide a crash course on Brazil to give you some background of this country that sometimes is perceived as self-isolated, since we are a Portuguese nation with a continental dimension surrounded by Spanish-speaking countries. So this is a feature that situates us in this geopolitical order. We are discovered in 22 April 1500 after the Treaty of Tordesillas that divided America between Spain and Portugal. And this is very important to demark part of our colonial mentality, since we were a colony of Portuguese crown, and we followed the pattern of colonial ideas. Our native population, constituted by the Tupi-Guarani nation, the Jés, and other tribes, were basically annihilated, eliminated by the Portuguese, given by disease and killing. They were not perceived as subjects of law, and our territory was perceived as res nullius, so up for grab, for appropriation. And this is very important to understand this idea of being an extractivist country with a vocation for commodity that can go back to our roots, our origins. So the name of our country, if you didn't know before, it's given to our tree known as pau-brasil, from which a dye was extracted and exported for the metropole of Portuguese Empire. So up to 1808, the Emperor Dom João I flew to Brazil, escaping Napoleonic Wars, and this is the really beginning of our country with this imperial vocation, because we were the center of the Portuguese crown until our independence in 1822. So this period of time is very important because we can see the circulation of the legal elites based on this idea, this dialectics between the center and the periphery. So we start to have our first constitution in 1824. Our first republic was installed in 1899, and slavery in Brazil was abolished just in 1888. So this is another divide that we have in Brazilian country, a racial divide that still pervades our society because the most vulnerable and the excluded are part of the black community who were never reparated for what happened in the past. So as you might know, we also endured a period of dictatorship. We had a first dictatorship in the after the First Republic with Getúlio Vargas, which was aligned with the idea of a fascist way and authoritarian regime that perdured until after World War II, when we had a brief democracy followed by a military coup d'etat. And during this military coup d'etat that stayed for 30 years in Brazil, we had a lot of forced killing, torture, execution, disappearance that was condemned also by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. Inaugurating a new period of democracy, we have the constitution that still stands in Brazil from 1988. This constitution is very important because it brings the idea of the rule of law, but the rule of law that encompasses democracy and social rights, to rivalize with the idea of the end of the Soviet bloc. And we also follow the heterodoxy of the IMF and the World Bank. We had a period of high inflation. A lot of austerity measures were imposed in Brazil and made the population suffer from those measures. After President Lula was elected in his first 2 terms, now is his 3rd term, but after he was already incarcerated, suffered a coup d'etat. We had Brazil entering a new scenario. We were launched for the world, and that was very meaningful for the country because the seed ideas of the Brics started back to 2009. So Brazil is one of the founding countries of the idea of the Brics, and the Brics aims to break these patterns of domination, of just being exploited, plundered, and exporter of commodities. We need to change this vision. We changed it for a while. We had a period of authoritarianism with the government of Bolsonaro. Lula was arrested. Brics was much less in the highlights of our priorities. And since Lula came back to power, we had a new moment in our history to project ourselves again. Of course, the problems of neoliberalism, of heterodoxy, of the domination of legal elites that are always circulating in the US, the influence of the US foreign policy is very pervasive in Brazil. So we are trying to create this new alliance that gives voice to the oppressed, gives voice to people who cannot talk on behalf of themselves. And I think this is the most important part of the Brics. And to be here representing my country in Italy, it's very meaningful. I thank you all for this opportunity. And I finish here.
Thank you, Mariella. Now, just for completeness, the context is this report was actually made by the IUC students of the class of 2025. We had a lot of collective discussion, so it's really in a way the brainchild of all of us. However, in each report there were groups of students that were contributing. So just to mention them, for South Africa they were Hudaif Daror and Abdulhamid Zahidi that helped for South Africa. For Brazil, they were Paula Augustina Garcia and Matthew Skaiki. Okay, thank you. So now the next presentation is on Russia. Russia, I preferred whenever possible to have presenters that were not directly involved in writing the paper to give a distance and the dialectic, especially because these are very early drafts and they can improve out of discussion. So for Russia, we have as a presenter, we have our former student Dmitry Kuprikov, who was in the IUC class last year. He was a practicing lawyer in Moscow. He holds a degree, an LLM, I think, from the University of Virginia, if I still remember. And he actually is currently a PhD student in the University of Camerino in southern Italy. So he's one of the many IUC students that continued an academic career, and he is here with us. So I asked Dmitry, because he is from the country, to present the report, to read the report on Russia and present it. Thank you so much, Dmitry.
Thank you so much, Professor UGO MATTEI. Thank you for organizing this reunion and this event. Thank you, IUC.
Little short.
Thanks to.
So a bit closer, not too much. And speak a little louder.
Yes, and a special thanks to students who wrote the report. And I'm very proud being part of this community, and thank you very much for this opportunity to present Russia in this event. So Russia is truly the largest country in the world and has a complex legal and institutional architecture shaped by history. From Orthodox Slavic core to diverse minorities, Russia has functioned as an imperial mosaic balancing centralized authority and local customary practices. The Russian legal system has evolved through geopolitical ruptures from Tsarism collapse, Bolshevik revolution, and neoliberal reforms of 1990s. The layered history has produced a unique legal landscape, one that is now shaping Russia's role within Brics bloc. Before codification, law in Russia was rooted in tribal ethics, Orthodox canons, and princely edicts. Early Slavic communities were governed by communal norms and kinship arbitration rather than positivist legislation. The Eastern Orthodox Church played a foundational role with canon law functioning alongside with secular princely codes. This dualism prefigured later legal stratification and reflected a normative pluralism that persists especially in Russia's autonomous republics. With the rise of Moscovite centralism, law became an instrument of consolidated leadership. The Uложение of 1649 entrenched serfdom and expanded jurisdiction of the Tsarism jurisdiction. Legal rationalization under Tsar was still uneven, while the great reforms of 1846 introduced judicial modernization. Law remained servant of bureaucracy, and legal education was scarce. The Bolshevik Revolution ushered judicial rupture further. The Soviet legal system was designed to reflect the will of proletariat as a class, as was interpreted by the party, Communist Party. Law functioned as the appanage of state policy, with courts subordinated to executive directives. Despite its repressive features, Soviet law had also liberating horizon. Land was collectivized, private property was abolished, and labor was, at least theoretically, decommodified. So the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 triggered a rapid legal overhaul shaped by neoliberal reform. Privatization law, investment treaty, and arbitration frameworks were introduced very often under guidance of foreign advisors. Under Vladimir Putin, legal structure have been recalibrated to emphasize sovereignty and institutional continuity and state coordination. While this has tightened restriction on civil society. It is often framed as a defense of judicial sovereignty against Western lawfare. Russia's 1993 constitution formally grounds the legal architecture of Russia Federation for now. It enshrines Russia as a democratic, federative, law-governed state with explicit presidential supremacy. The judiciary, while formally independent, functions with a vertically integrated system, highly influenced by executive power. Beneath the centralized legal uniformity lies substratum of legal pluralism in republics like Tatarstan, Chechnya. Islamic and customary law continue to operate informally, revealing some jurisdictional heterogeneity. Russia's political economy is dominated by state-centric capitalism, with strategic sector controlled by either parastate or oligarch entities. The backbone of Russian economy remains its hydrocarbon complex, oil complex, which serves as a geopolitical instrument from time to time. Sanctions imposed by West have forced Russia to pivot toward Brics, accelerating the dollarization of economy and trade. With Brics, Russia champions multipolar legal pluralism, respect for state sovereignty, and the reform of international institutions to reflect the demographic and economic shifts toward the global south. Russia's energy diplomacy supports for localization of extraction industry and critique of green imperialism in Western climate policy further contribute to Brics' legal institutional project. While Brics represent a counter-hegemonic challenge to Western dominance, it faces internal contradiction and lacks strategic cohesion. Member states maintain varied interpretation of legitimacy of imposed on Russia sanctions, and some actions by the members have triggered debate within the blocs. Nonetheless, Russia's insistence on judicial autonomy, economic decoupling, and cultural plurality provides strategic ballast for nations seeking to escape the legal straitjacket of the Washington Consensus. Brics represent an ongoing experiment in constructing alternative legal framework attuned to the political economies in global south. Russia's layered legal system, with its failures and its possibilities, offer vital assets to the Brics project. As the Brics evolves into a norm-generating geopolitical alliance, Russia, historical consciousness of imperialism, of tradition of state-led development, and legal realism can contribute to the forging of a truly pluriversal legal order. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Dimitri. Now, for the contributors, the student contributors that actually wrote the Russian report are Giovanni Bianchi and Hamza Tihuna. There is a very important layer of law, which is Soviet law, that has been exceedingly influential, both directly in some parts of the world, including China, India, Egypt, among the Brics countries, and indirectly in creating as a mirror some sort of civilization also in Western legal mentality. A lot of the reforms in labor law, in family law, in international law were actually the mirror of what was going on in the Soviet Union with Soviet legal innovation that was very radical throughout the 20s. This distinction and division between socialist and capitalist is very crucial in understanding what is going on in the world today. Because, you see, in the Western mainstream, there is this sort of post-fall of the post-Cold War idea that socialism is over. That, you know, the world is turning to capitalism, that after all, even China is a capitalist country, that capitalism is alive and well, it's just a matter of fine-tuning its internal structure. This is a wrong narrative. should be actually rejected. Not only we have important countries and the first economy in the world, which is China, who has the people's dictatoriate in the constitution at Article 1. So it is a clear socialist country maintaining its socialist characteristics. But the socialist layer, as we are surveying the countries of the Brics, is extremely influential in understanding the fact that these countries are not interested in leaving some private corporation and some private entities become those that steer the direction. For the very simple reason that if you leave things in the hands of market fundamentalism, the short term of the profit motive is gonna destroy any possible order. The profit motive of the corporate structure is short-termist. In order to understand and imagine a world of legality, we have to take a medium, long-term perspective, and that is not something that can be taken if, we are worried about how much we are making in the stock exchange in the next 3 months. We need to have some broader understanding, and I think that the period of socialist legality, with all its issues and problems that were especially due, I think, to non-ready technological conditions, today in the new technological setting we have great possibilities of improvement from the point of view of creating some plan and some longer-term vision for the Brics and for the legality we are seeking now. Okay. So now, without further ado, I will call on Avi Singh on India to take the floor. Thank you, Avi. Avi. Okay. So Avi is how to say? Is the longest standing. I think is the dean of the faculty at the IUC, because I think he was the first professor to came to teach at the IUC the first year when he was very, very young guy. And he came from the London School of Economics. He studied at Hastings College of the Law with me there for a while. Then he came to the IUC. He's been an extremely successful barrister in India. He has been also, he is now a King's Counsel, which is the highest echelon of the legal profession in India. He's been the Vice Attorney General of the City of Delhi, which is not a little local job, because the City of Delhi has 20 plus million people there living, so it's a big deal. It's like being the minister. Many of these ministers that in Europe today boss all the others come from countries that have less than 500,000 people, okay? Including our foreign affairs officer, Miss Kalia. So we were getting lectures from people that could be, mayors of small cities, and then that would be the proportions we have to make when we understand these things. So without further ado, Avi Singh, thank you very much for being with us. Just 1 second, the students that helped out, that actually prepared the work on India are Ashutosh Ustav and Hayat Jalalali. Thank you very much.
I mean, attempting to describe India in 10 minutes is always going to be failing, because we are, I think you have a more difficult job in China. But the chaos of India is, I think, slightly different than China's. But India's political or legal economy, a bit like anybody who's experienced is traffic, runs through many generations. So if you are trying to do a taxonomy, the challenge remains that it is traditional, political, and professional, all at the same time, all coexisting, sometimes in some sort of harmony, not the wine that Professor Unger was talking about, but very often in a lot of conflict. But it is there. So in this, perspective, in international law at least, there is some tranquility, which I'll just get to at the end of it. So India, as the report some of you have read in the hypothesis, of course starts with traditional law. But even in our traditional law, there isn't really a uniformity. We have, of course, the tradition of personal laws, which are specific to the religions. We have a land organization system, which is to pre-Mughal in most of the country, but not all of the country. We have a criminal system which was pre-Mughal, Persian, which was then intermixed with the British system and developed, of course, into the Criminal Procedure Code, etc., by Macaulay in 1860. We have, as Hugo has talked about later on, we'll come to it, the socialist law. But really, the traditional law came from many, many sources of law, in addition to being, in many cases, oral. And there's a lot of new literature coming out in the British requirement or sort of overemphasis on text, giving supremacy to a particular kind of law, including, for instance, the idea of marriage being a sacrament in Hindu law, which was basically a textual trick played by a Maharaja in southern India who was asked to divorce his radical wife by the British because she was anti-British. So he hired a bunch of clever Brahmins who came up with a textual basis for the sacrament being holy in Hindu law, when the society that he was part of was matrimonial and allowed multiple marriages both for women and men. So, this then became part of the Hindu code without anybody figuring out where it came from, and a uniformity where everybody insisted that it's a sacrament and there was one man and one wife. So these are the kind of sort of changes that have happened in very recent history. We're talking about 18th and 19th century. So on layer upon layer of coexistence, etc. And on top of this, one aspect which is very, very missed out is, which is really the backbone of the state even today for a large extent, which is not taught in a law school, is the revenue collection and law and order structure of the colonial state, which has survived almost without change, which is the power of the person who heads the police station and the power of the revenue collector to define who owns the land. And that sort of substrata of colonial law has survived without much change, even despite a lot of legislation, etc. Another strata of colonial law which came in, of course, was the right to property. In India, like in many other traditional things, property was something which was ephemeral. It was given as a revenue collection. It was based on right of usage, etc. The British, using rhetorics which is very familiar to people in post-World War II neoliberalism, use the rhetoric both of efficiency on one hand and on conservatism on the other hand to do two things. One was the zamindari, which was sort of the enclosures of commons, giving landowners the right of inheritance, of giving them permanency over the land, much like the enclosures in England. And secondly, the greatest land acquisition by statute, of course the US was bigger, but by statute was the Indian Forest Act, which took approximately 30% of the land in India and vested it with the state in the name, very familiar now with climate change activism, in the name of conserving the forest, which basically in one act took away all traditional usage and property rights, mainly of the more indigenous communities within India, and we are still suffering the fallouts of that. In post-World War II, we have the Constitution, which was, of course, at one level a status quo document. Much of it is the Government of India Act of 1925, but in other respects, a very radical document which leans towards equality, because the person who made his mark felt on it was Dr. Ambedkar, who was by birth a Dalit, constitutional law scholar, Harvard educated for whatever that's worth. And he took a stance which was completely against the inequality, particularly of the caste system, and put in the idea both of affirmative action as well as equality being central to the Constitution, but also economic democracy, which of course required an element of political law in redistribution. And I know, whereas Christine, South Africa is now struggling with land redistribution, and this was a big thing which went on. Do tell me when my time is up. Yeah. But this was a big issue which India faced in the 50s and 60s, and I know it's been a template for many scholars in South Africa and Zimbabwe, is what to do with property rights. Partly due to the judiciary then trying to enforce property rights against forced land redistribution. The first constitutional amendments, one was limiting free speech, and the second was taking away the right to property. So formally India, which of course has private property, has no right to private property. It has a right to due process against taking away private property, but there's no constitutional right to private property, which is strange because nobody bothered to change any of that when we started liberalizing in the 90s, but that's still the position today. And that was done to deal with the political problem of control over large private estates by a class which was perhaps thought antithetical to a newly independent India. And the contrast between India and Pakistan is sometimes attributed to, in terms of politics, to the lack of redistribution in Pakistan. So the big families kept control of the political economy there, while the big families in India, many of them, of course, people I grew up with, slowly lost their economic power because they lost their lands. One aspect which I forgot to mention, of course, is that was this continuity between Iran and the Arab world, East Africa, etc., in terms of traditional law, but also in terms of the colonial law. So when the British started to codify, they took the example of Ireland, they codified it in India, then they took the same codes, but because why should you repeat what you've already done? So when I go to Nigeria or Kenya or Malaysia, I can find the same section of the Penal Code, the same section of the Contract Act, the same section. So there is a continuity of the law where we can speak the same language even if it is a very thin layer of common law. But I do agree with what Professor UGO was saying, that the civil law, common law dichotomy doesn't really apply because that's a superficial layer, and even an English common lawyer who will see the trappings of common law would then be confused by how it's actually applied in itself. Talking about sort of the professional law era, we also have, of course, the assertion, we can call it political law, by the Supreme Court of what is a very important doctrine in modern constitutionalism, which is the basic structure doctrine. In 1973, the Supreme Court came up with an idea that the Constitution cannot have its basic structure changed. And the basic structure included secularism, it included democracy, it included federalism, among other important things. So it gave to itself the primacy to the judiciary to be not only an implementer of laws, but to protect itself, one can say, from more political interference. It gave itself the power to be the arbitrator of what is defined by the Constitution. Now that is problematic in many ways because the judiciary remains male-dominant, it remains upper caste, Hindu-dominant, etc. But it does create a balance between the executive and the judiciary, which of course we've had an emergency era, we've had the repoliticization of the law in recent terms, a greater assertion of the executive, a politicization of every level of society. You know, Professor Unger referred to hot politics. We are in an era of hot politics. There isn't a professorship, there isn't a judge who's not being put through a litmus test. So despite all of this element, today, the government is always having a list of who's with them and who's against them. And you can be very quickly against them, and judges are being required, unlike the bureaucrats that they usually are, to be brave. And believe me, in our profession, you don't want to be dependent on a brave judiciary. You know, judiciaries function very well when they can function in isolation, away from the public and the government limelight. But very strong executives make it very hard for the judiciary to actually have power. So that is why, you know, governments, what is Professor Unger, between malice and Mussolini, I would like just a little bit of malice. Just that. That would be my ideal form of government for India at least. Just coming very quickly to international law. Very quickly, 1 minute. India's always had an element of self-determination as its sort of North Pole for international law, which led to the Bandung Conference in 1956, which China was invited to. Unfortunately, the plane that Chow and Lai was supposed to be on from Hong Kong to Bandung crashed, leading to great suspicion that that was actually a purposeful, because it was lent to him by India, but he survived, of course, because he missed the plane. But Bandung, then Belgrade. The non-aligned movement is the rhetoric, harbinger of Brics. So these ideas have always been there. What hasn't been there is the economic power. But today, Brics Plus is 45% of the global economy. The G7 is less than 30%. So what is missing is a coherent articulation. Of course, there's hypocrisy. I mean, international law based on the width of hypocrisy is completely dead. But what's missing is for BRICS to be able to articulate a new form of global governance. And Brazil's having the meeting next month, I believe, and it is very much reform of global governance is the theme of that conference, and it needs an articulation which I hope we can all help with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Avi. This is very, very interesting, and of course, it is also, I think, what we should, the line we should try to walk in this enterprise, because creating or imagining the creation of a new rule of law, let's call it that way, which is both professional and political and traditional in the same way, you know, and has a balance of that within mutual respect, is something that has to come from the basic knowledge of each other of the parties that are going to try to create it. Cannot work as an injection from the top down. That is true both if the injection is political, as it happened during colonialism, or even if the injection is well-intentioned, as in many do-gooders like the law and development movement in the 60s and 70s, you know, that actually failed out of this idea that you can take good American-centered academic intelligent thoughts, which are beyond discussion, and just go out there and teach how to apply them in different contexts. As you know, the whole thing failed very badly because at some point Garanter and Merriman and these guys realized that exactly in Brazil, this narrative of using the instrumentalist vision of law as created at Yale at Harvard was deployed by the authoritarian fascist government to oppress the people and take away any kind of counter-hegemonic force in the law. So it is really not simple to do the things because it's not simple to know each other in a context like BRICS. The staggering complexity is unbelievable. I thought, I've been working for 30 years in the Common Core of European Private Law project, and I thought I've seen diversity in the law at play, but just at this very, very superficial level of these reports, you can see that the amount of fundamental understandings that are not the same and that, is just fantastic. So because I think diversity is wealth and richness, this is a very interesting area to put our head in and to learn from each other a lot, but then also with in mind that at some point knowledge is power, and that at some point knowledge should not remain abstract, but should translate into some sort of political platform. Without further ado, we now have the floor to Leo Gangua, who deserves a special introduction from me, because Leo, first of all, he is the real mind behind this meeting. It was his idea to have the IUC meeting alumni network. Was Leo's idea to actually establish something permanent on the BRICS. All of that happened while visiting the gorgeous campus of the University of Lanzhou, China, where next year there is going to be the second BRICS forum. And so, for that only reason is, he is really kind of someone to thank a lot about what we are doing. But also, Leo has been a long-time friend of mine. He studied with me more than 20 years ago at the University of California at Hastings, so he has the same vice of Avi. And he then went on for a spectacular academic career in China that brought him now to be, among many accomplishments, he was brought to be the president of the Italian-Chinese Center at the University of Lanzhou, and also he's in charge of the study of the social of the social ranking platform. It's one of the people in the group that are actually working on that special, very special institution that China is suggesting for as a form of technologically knowledgeable legality, I would put that way. So Leo, without further ado, thank you very much. You have the floor. Thank you. Okay, oh, well, that's fantastic. Very good. Oh, just a student reported on China. Yes, thank you very much, Leo. Then we have to take a picture here. Okay.
Is that the flag of the association?
Okay, student reporter from China have been Rosanne Alfarra, Janine El Namura, and Abibatu Chizai. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yes, still I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the organizer of this forum, in particular to Professor UGO MATTEI, to IUC, and the team at the IUC Center for China Studies. We still have a Center for China Studies here at IUC. For your extraordinary efforts that make possible this landmark law forum. And it's co-organized by 3 premier research institutions from China, Italy, and Russia. It's my honor to be here. And I'm involved from the very beginning to develop this forum, just as UGO said, particularly in guiding the drafting of the China report alongside with the authors, just mentioned 3 authors, and as well as with Professor UGO MATTEI. But to deliver such a collective work within maybe 15 or 10 minutes is all just task for me. So just let me make a brief introduction of the China report, then give one comment on the points related to the Chinese rule of law, the latest development of Chinese rule of law. Yes, this report employs UGO MATTEI's framework of 3 patterns of law to analyze China's legal system. It emphasizing China's historical continuity and distinctiveness within Brics context. So I just mentioned the following highlights of legal transformations over the past 3 or 4 decades, and also the core research conclusions of China report. According to MATTEI's taxonomy, China's legal system is characterized as a hierarchical integration of political law, traditional law, and professional law, which challenges the Western-centric legal taxonomies. And the system inherits imperial China's centralized bureaucratic tradition with Confucian ethics shaping norms of moral governance, hierarchical order, and administrative harmony, which persist in modern China's governance culture. So as far as the key transformation happened at 3 layers in the past 13 or 14 years in China, our report concluded 3 points. One is advancement in professional law. It is institutional and legislative development since the 1990s. China has reconstructed its legal education system, established specialized courts, for example, Court for Intellectual Property, Court for Environmental Protection, and pursued extensive codification. The 2020 Civil Code marked the milestone in civil law systematization. Reforms in administrative legislation and IP law aimed to enhance legal predictability for foreign investment. And the second is judicial and regulatory reforms. Judicial professionalism improved through evidence rule standardization and strengthened lawyers' rights. Financial regulation tightened over digital payment and stable coins, while mainland China banned private stable coins. But Hong Kong Special Administrative Region introduced the world's first dedicated stable coins regulations just in last month in 2025. And the second, strengthening of political law. The Chinese Constitution explicitly designates the Communist Party of China as the defining feature of socialism with Chinese characteristics. The party guides legislation and judicial direction via policy and personnel appointments with law-serving political objectivities. For example, national unity, economic development. And continuing the tradition of legal instrumentalism, the rule of law with the Chinese characteristics since 2013 institutionalized party leadership, balancing political stability with legal regularization. Third, modern adaptation of traditional law. Confucian principle of social harmony underpin mediation practice in dispute resolution, while meritocratic system persists through civil service exam. Traditional governance ideals band with digital tools. For example, the social credit system combines rule of morality or rule of virtue with big data surveillance, and internet courts digitize traditional mediation. And as to the China's role in international legal engagement and the Brics context, we have some 2 points. First is China emphasizes sovereignty and non-intervention in multilateral bodies such as UN and WTO, opposing legal imperialism. The community of shared future for mankind frames international law as a platform for equal sovereignty, not value imposition. Second, through the Belt and Road Initiative, China promotes legal diplomacy through contract standardization, cross-border dispute resolution. The 2025, China launched the International Organization for Mediation, advanced a non-adversarial dispute settlement, offering a Brics-led alternative to Western legal order and embodying discolonial legal pluralism. And there are 3 core research conclusions. One, according to concerned with the nature of China's legal system, the report concluded China's legal system is a layered governance model dominated by political law, with the traditional law and the professional law subordinated to political authority. It differs from Western rule of law, but affirms a coherent legitimacy based on development performance and social stability. And the second conclusion is China's contribution to global legal pluralism. The Chinese model provides a non-liberal path to legal modernization for Brics and developing countries. Its hybridity, it means a hybridized the traditional political and professional law, challenges the necessity of Western legal transplantation, driving global legal order towards multipolarity. The third conclusion is dynamic adaptation and challenges. While professional law reform has improved sectoral transparency, they remain contained by political law. Western evaluations of Chinese rule of law often reflect ideological bias, underscoring the need to interpret its legal system through its own historical and governance objectives. And these are the summary of the China report of Brics Plus Law Forum. So at last, I would like to add one comment on the key issue covered by the report. It's related to social credit system. Let me see. According to UGO MATTEI's classification of Chinese law as a politically dominated alliance with the empirical reality. And it also, if we agree with this conclusion, and it also signals or it also means the collapse of China's indigenous legal order. Since 2013, under the strategic version of the Chinese Dream, the Chinese government has initiated a comprehensive project of legal reconstruction, one that aims to synthesize rule of law and rule of morality from a top-down institutional design perspective. Traditional law and professional law paradigm has been reconceptualized as co-equal. In this light, China's social credit system emerges as a particularly salient innovation through often, though it is often mischaracterized or vilified from within Western legal discourse. Contrary to dystopia portrayal, this system, the Chinese social credit system, seeks to integrate administrative integrity, commercial reliability, social ethics, and judicial credibility. So it is a modern response to the moral deficits left unresolved by both traditional law and professional law. So supported by big data and AI technologies, the social credit system allows for dynamic behavioral modeling of all kinds of legal subjects, both public subjects and private subjects. So though this point potentially troubling and UGO MATTEI's smart law critic, but in China, it is conceived as a morally enriched regulatory mechanism, a digital rehabilitation of Confucian normativity. So it's one of my comment for the China report. So in closing, I would like to respectfully borrowing some words from Chairman Mao, the founder of the People's Republic of China. He said, one must not only criticize others, but also engage in self-criticism. So it is in that spirit that we continue our dialogue. So thanks for your listening, and I would also like to extend a cordial invitation to all of you, especially the IUC alumni and emerging scholars, to attend the second Brics Plus Law Forum, which will be hosted by Lanzhou University, a leading institute in northwest China in 2026. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Liu. This is going to be, I believe, one of the most challenging issues to be approached in a genuinely comparative perspective aimed at understanding rather than at judging. Because this issue of the social credit is the way in which legality transforms into technology, which opens a huge amount of issues to discuss, but not discussing the issues is not solving them. The policy of just pretending things are not happening is just stupid. The technological transformation of the moment and the way cognitivism, capitalism is changing in the direction of owning cognition, and how we can use that and deploy that in a civilizing rather than in a plunderous manner is an issue that have to be approached. Otherwise, we are kind of just putting taboos on the table. And I think that understanding the attitude of the different BRICS countries towards surveillance and towards the deployment of technological solutions in the creating of the new order might be one of the most important things we can do, because we cannot leave those discussions just in the hands of technicians, just in the hands of people that believe that, technological progress is social progress to begin with. No, that's not true. Technological change and progress has to be politically questioned and engaged, and has to be steered by a sort of political consensus. So that, I suggest, should be probably the topic of next year, of next year reflection in China, just to put the hands right away into the into the most contentious part of how the Western people feel entitled to privacy rights incompatible with certain kind of vision. All of that is good to be known by direct observation of the different contexts in which these questions are arising. They are arising everywhere. They are just discussed more openly in China than elsewhere. Okay, so this was a very, very interesting presentation. Thank you very much, Liu. Also, I forgot to say that we had, he is a long-established friend of the IUC. We established together the Center for Chinese Studies here. They host Professor Mastruzzo practically every summer in China, and his presence usually extends and spills over to other students that go there. So there is an ongoing relationship of friendship that is really kind of has proven very interesting and lovely for all of us. So now we finished BRICS, and we are in the plus. Okay, so we finished the BRICS and we get into the plus. The plus happened very recently. It happened in 2024. And so these countries that are part of the plus, we were able to survey a few, thanks to a network of connections that we developed in these last 20 years or so. So now I call to the floor to talk about Ethiopia. On Ethiopia is going to be Michael Sebsibe, who is in the... Michael is one of the brilliant students of this year's class, and all this conversation and this work has been immensely enriched by his insights in the past. So Michael, please share your thoughts about. He's a lawyer. He's been practicing law in Addis Ababa for quite a long time. I don't know where you got your first degree, I'm sorry, but now he is completing brilliantly the IUC program, and he is with us. Thank you very much for being with us. You have the floor. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Professor UGO MATTEI, for this opportunity, and thank you everyone for being here. As already described, I'm from Ethiopia, so it's a bit intimidating since I'm the only student here. So let me discuss about Ethiopia. I want to frame it out in three different sections. I will talk about the history and politics, then the legal system, then I'll discuss about the economy in relation with the Brics. So basically, Ethiopia is one of the oldest nations in Africa. It's located in the northern Eastern Africa. I don't know if anybody heard about the Aksumite Empire, one of the oldest. It dates back to the 1st century. And so far, until 1974, we had a monarch, imperial monarch, and we've been ruled by kings and emperors. So the politics was basically warlords and nobilities that are loyal to the kings were ruling the country. But in 1974, there was a coup d'etat by Mengistu Haile Mariam, as a colonel in the military, and he brought a socialist approach or a socialism to the country led by Marxist-Leninist ideology, and it changed the whole dynamics of the politics. Then after 1974 till 1991, this socialism ideology was basically leading the country, so it was a time of terror because it attacked any perceived rebellion parties, and in 1991 we come up with another government, which is a federalism government that is organized based on ethnical framework. So basically the history and politics can be categorized in three basic frameworks: monarchs, then socialism, then we have the federalism system, which is based on ethnicity. So to speak about the legal system in Ethiopia, traditionally we used to describe it as a civil law tradition, but it's a surface level. It cannot describe the whole part of the framework of law. But in the eyes of the three patterns of law that was contributed by UGO MATTEI, my colleague and I were interested to find out that Ethiopia was a mixed between the three patterns of politics, tradition, and law. For the most part, before 1974, we had this legal document which was called the Fitaha Negest. It's translated to English, Justice of the Kings. It's embedded with canon law and religious, the biblical teachings of the Holy Bible. So that aligned with the traditional rule of law, and we had customs where some ethnicities were using to resolve family matters and also disputes on land issues. So before 1974, most of Ethiopian legal system can be classified as the traditional rule of law. However, in 1974, as I mentioned earlier, the Communist or the Socialist Party changed this to a more political rule of law. During this time, the constitution was also changed back to a socialist constitution which nationalized all private property and land was nationalized. The judiciary was hardly autonomous. There was no professionalism in the legal system. Professor UGO MATTEI also mentioned this in the three pattern of law. Mengistu Haile Mariam was a very brutal leader, so hardly professionalism was in the legal sphere. But in 1991, the EPRDF government, which is led by a coalition of ethnic-based party, they came up with a constitution of 1995, which is a federal parliamentarian government forming constitution. And it brought some level of modernization in the legal system and marked some level of professionalism in the legal system because of separation of law and religion, democracy, and also autonomy for regional states and decentralization of power. So based on the three pattern of law, we saw that in terms of history, we share the three patterns of law, all the three aspects of the three pattern of law. Also in terms of area, there is an accurate paragraph in three patterns of law that says one legal system may belong to different families according to the area of law that we are considering. The same system may belong to the rule of traditional law when we consider family law, while belonging to the rule of professional law as far as commercial law is concerned, and to the rule of law political law when we look at the criminal justice system. So this also accurately resonates to the current landscape of legal system in Ethiopia, because we cannot simply say it's a rule of law, because when it comes to some criminal matters that are related with politics, it usually goes back to the political rule of law. Commercial matters, which I'm practicing, is more or less a professional legal system, professional legal sphere. And we also have this customary laws that we use for family laws and some dispute resolution approach. So that also resonates with our traditional system of law. This is partly the legal system. Our economy is dominant. Three aspects of our economy are agriculture, industry, and service. Agriculture has been dominant for the past few years, but now it's transiting to service, because there is a lot of liberalization going on, and some big farms working on telecom sector and technology are coming up. So that made the transition to service dominance. We have been, for the most part, suffering from foreign currency scarcity, and lately we had an agreement with IMF to take a loan around 3.4 billion USD in concessional agreement. That comes with a string attached, because as always IMF would like to make a new economic micro reform in the country, so which liberalized the economy, opening up the most of the sectors that were usually reserved for domestic investors to be opened. Also, floating of our currency almost doubled from the 2024 June, more than doubled. The devaluation has doubled, and we also privatized many of our traditionally national-owned institutions, which are our telecom sector. Our banking is also being liberalized, and foreign banks are being allowed to enter the country. So the joining of Brics, I think, in my opinion, and based on the think tanks and the speculations on most of the discussions we have in Ethiopia, it's not obvious, or it's not clear why the government has joined the Brics, because it was not public the reason why it joined. But most speculation were in the internet that Ethiopia is mostly interested in the economical aspect of the Brics, because as you can see, we only have IMF as our loaners, and most of the loans are subject to some conditions, and we want to also have another alternative, which is the new development bank. That's one of the reasons. Also, a market. Ethiopia is more of an importing country, but it wants to export its products, mostly agriculture products. So that brings also a lot of opportunity in these big markets. that is the major issue that has been discussed as to the reason why we joined Brics. Otherwise, also the geopolitical situation in the area, because Ethiopia is relatively close to Europe and also to the Middle East. We have a very influential aspect in the region. The same date we joined, I always mention this, the same date we joined the Brics, we also made an agreement with Somaliland to have a port. We are landlocked, so there was some contention between Somali and Ethiopia because of that.
Not new.
It's not new, but it was interesting to see the move by the Ethiopian government that it was doing another political move and also joining the Brics. So this is the brief.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you very much. Excellent. I need to add, because I forgot, that the Ethiopian report that was delivered before has been prepared by Michael Shumie and Al El Ainain, that were both IUC 2025 students that were involved in the preparation of the report on Ethiopia. So thank you very, very much. Okay, so now I guess we can start. So I give the floor to discuss about Egypt to Amr Mohammed. Please, Amr, you have the floor.
Thank you, Professor, for giving me the opportunity to introduce my beloved Egypt. Thanks you all for being here. I would like also to thank my classmate Haura, which she worked with me on this report. I'm going to give you a brief overview about Egypt. Geographically, Egypt is over 1 million kilometers square, with over 118 population, basically the most populated country in the Arab world, and the third in Africa. Egypt is located in the northern part of Africa, and moreover Sinai Peninsula in Asia, which means that Egypt bridging Asia and Africa, and moreover the Suez Canal, which representing a global trade transit hub. To see the legal system development in Egypt, I'm going to try to overview it through the length of the three patterns of law for Professor Mattei. We can see that through the traditional law layer and political law layer and also the professional law layer. So what I will try to do is, starting by traditional law layer, to understand this layer we have to understand there was basic three eras. First, the pre-colonization era, and the second, the colonization era, and the third, the post-colonization era. The pre-colonization era, we can see that the legal system was basically about the customary religious regulations, and moreover, the indigenous culture of the people themselves. After that, the European colonization came. We can see that in 1799 to 1801 with the French colonization, which started the seed, seeding the idea of a pluralistic legal system by shaping the mixed courts. And moreover, it also introduced the idea of codification, which later on Abdulrazak Stanhuris used it for the codification of the civil law. Then, after 8 years, the British colonization came. It started to initiate also, to increase also the pluralistic legal system through the council courts. And we can see, obviously, the supremacy of the European judges within these courts, whether the mixed courts or whether the council courts, and also specializing courts for the citizens themselves, religious courts, which undermine the confidence in the legal system itself. And moreover, we also can find the 1952 revolution, which is basically the rise of Nasser era. In this era, the idea of decolonizing the country itself was extremely dominant within the socialist and nationalist ideology. Basically, we can see that through the influence of the Arab Socialist Union. And basically, the legal system was trying to serve the ideology, the political ideology, which focuses on moving the ownership from the monarchy to a centralized authority state, and in some cases or in some contexts for the peasants, in the context of lands. And we can see also a more political lens, which focuses on serving, the legal system focuses on serving the political ideology of the regime itself. And after that also came Al-Sadat, and we can see the new liberalism ideology that came with the Sadat. Although it wasn't that very much effective, we saw an increase with the GDP numbers or figures. However, it wasn't that much with the whole class in the society. It was basically increased the monarchy, let's say, wealth. And also it's a kind, still continue the political influence in the legal system. After the Sadat assassination, started the emergency law, continued through 30 years of Mubarak regime. And we can see that there was a kind of contribution to different legal systems, especially when it comes to commercialization, the commercial area. So the commercial regulations. And after that, there came the post-2011 revolution, which considered, let's say, a pivotal era in the modern history of Egypt. The constitution was focusing on identifying Egypt as a secular, democratic, and also religious, and somehow basically in the legal sources of the regulation. So after that, and also it was focusing on the human rights regulations. Of course, after 2017, there were more regulations has been issued and so on. And that's, basically the legal system development through colonization, French and British, and then the 1952 revolution with the Abdel Nasser, and then Sadat and Mubarak regimes, and then 2011 revolution. For the rule of Egypt in the Brics, from my perspective, it's more economical than political. Joining the Brics was motivated by the idea of attracting and incentivizing more foreign investment in the country. And we can see that obviously with the increase of the Chinese company, more specifically with the Suez Canal free zone and so on. So basically it's economically more than political, and also the geopolitical rule of Egypt in the country. As mentioned before, the most populated country in the Arab world, the third in Africa, it bridges Africa and Asia, and also the Suez Canal, which represents as, let's say, a global trade hub transit. All of it considered as a pivotal rule for Egypt and the Brics, and also moreover with the Belt and Silk route with China. So this is Egypt.
When in this case something is more economical than political, it means that we are still discussing whether Brics is going to be a viable, possible political alternative in terms of hegemony, or whether it's going to be one of the many attempts to create something different or something that gives a stop to a certain kind of monopoly.
Exactly.
Because the development bank clearly is challenging the position of the IMF.
IMF, yeah.
And that is very attractive for countries that maybe politically are not aligned in the idea to go in a different direction, whether because they cannot or because they don't want to. But again, the institutional building is about creating structures that survive the change in the leader of the moment.
Exactly.
Because the law is about making things institutional rather than dependent on the single individual person that is in charge at that particular moment. Before giving the floor on our Iranian report, that of course is very interesting and waited for the geopolitical situation at the moment, I need to say that on preparation of the Egypt, there were Amrat Muhammad and Awara Hirazi were the students, reporters of the 2022 and 25 IUC. So now, Iran, I give therefore the floor to Hamidreza Azimi. He has a PhD from Iran. He's been a lecturer in a variety of capacities in different Iranian institutions. He came to Torino. He studied in India, you see, and I think ended the PhD program here. First of all, I need to give you my condolences for the people, the casualties in your country in this very difficult phase. Thank you for being with us. He was supposed to fly back last week, the day in which the bombing started, and so he canceled the trip, of course. He cannot go back to his family at the moment. For us it's good because we have him with us, but, I'd rather not having had him. Anyway, thank you very much for being with us, and please, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I am absolutely... First of all, Professor, I am absolutely delighted to be here with you. As always, Dr. Mastroso says. So, and I want to mention that I am very blessed because today's morning I met with two other professors of the Italian scholar traditions, Professor Elisabetta Grande and also Professor Graziade. They were here. I cannot see them right now, but it was a very good moment for me. Let me start. After the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Iran established another fundamentally different legal system, different from Western styles. It wasn't secular anymore, but it has been based on two main ideas: revolutionary leftist ideas and also political Islam, Sharia, fiqh. This gave rise to the scholars like Professor Mattei that would call the rule of traditional law. But what I meant by referring to the idea of being traditional, for me, it meant that the sources of legislation is fixed and predetermined, and also the interpreters and also the practitioners, the enforcers, all of them are fixed and predetermined. And something that is very important for me, and I really ask you to bear in mind, there is no necessarily correspondence between the popular beliefs, the society's belief, and the Sharia law. So it can be something very different. Sharia, as a mechanism, acts according to its internal logic, and it gives no credit to the beliefs of the society. So if you have this in your mind during my lecture or in your life, you can see that the concept of cultural diversity can be meaningless in some aspects. According to the constitutional framework of Iran, we have an Islamic parliament. According to the Article 4 of the Constitution, all the laws and the regulations shall comply with Sharia. So the law that parliament enacts must conform to Sharia. There is another institution that is very important. That name is the Guardian Council. This council, Guardian Council, consists of 12 persons, 6 Islamic jurists and 6 legal experts. All of them have been appointed by the supreme leader, directly or indirectly. And this council is responsible for reviewing all the parliament's enactments before it can be put into force. So, at first, if the parliament enacts a law, it should go to Guardian Council, and after the decision, the ratification of the Guardian Council, the law can be put into effect. However, after we had a war with Iraq for more than 8 years, after that war, after the huge sanctions, after the resistance that society showed towards the Islamic regime, they developed another concept that can be called as expediency, or maslahat in Persian, and also in Arabic. They institutionalized a new concept as maslahat, or expediency, and they put it into the constitution. And this expediency, this Christmas Council, has 2 main duties. First of all, it has this role to mediate between the parliament and the Guardian Council. So, in some times, this council has this power to enact laws even though that law is against the Sharia. And that is something very new. Before the Islamic Revolution, you cannot find this concept in the Shia history. And secondly, another duty that this council has this power to enact directly law under supervision of supreme leader's order. So, as you can see, it seems that we have a rigid constitution, but in fact, on the ground, according to this new institution, the Sharia can be violated, and also supreme leader can enact law directly. When it comes to the idea of legal transplantations, or the ideas of accepting foreign legal constructs into the domestic law, you should know that the Iranian regime is a conservative and also anti-Western oriented government. Okay, so they resisted. They always resisted in order to do not accept the foreign legal constructs into the domestic law. But sometimes reality can defeat you, and you shall be mandated to accept some of those foreign institutions into the domestic legal system. In those moments, those foreign institutions shall be assumed as virus, that they can interrupt the coherence of the system. They can function as virus. It is assumed like this. So, what was the strategy? To the extent possible, transplant only a small portion or limited elements selectively into the domestic legal system in order to make the legal system immune from the broader structural change. If you can see this point, if you got this point, it can help you to understand the legal system in a very well-structured way. For example, we have jury. We have jury in our criminal law, in our criminal code, but it has no function. It's there only for the decoration. So as you can see, we took the title, as a vaccine, and we made the legal system immune from the broader structural change. Turning to the economy. After the war, and we fought with Iraq for more than 8 years, and it's a lot, the Islamic Republic began a significant shift or change from the state-led authority or economy to the controlled economic liberalization. So, in a very direct and straight word, they tried to to promote the idea of privatization. And this happened under the presidency of Hashemi Rafsanjani. And what was the idea? Let's have the free market inside the country. But there was a huge barrier there. According to the Article 44 of the Constitution, all the big industries shall be governed by the state. So the state, according to Article 44 of the Constitution, the state is restricted from carrying out privatization in key industries. But what did he do, Hashemi Rafsanjani? In the cooperation with the Supreme Leader, and by that council, the Expediency Council, they tried to give the new interpretation. And actually, they changed the Constitution without the formal structure of revising that. And they opened the door for the more privatizations. But yet, privatization did not bring the promised transparency or even the competition. It failed. When we are referring to the state-owned companies in Iran, we use the word of dawlati, okay? And when we are referring to the private sector, we call them khususi. Nowadays in Iran, we combine this word to criticize the policies that governments implemented during these decades, khusulati. What do we mean by this word? We believe that this type of privatization gave the power to the elites, to military groups, to the clerical networks. They took over former public-owned assets. And as a result, instead of reducing central power, it helped strengthen state power through the economy. Very simple. We took assets from the government that we people had the chance at least to change government every 4 years, and we gave them to the elites and those people who have weapons and also money and know there is no public supervision over them. Politically, since the late 1990s, Iranians have been divided between two main political groups: reformists, who seek better relationship with West, and also conservatives who favor closer ties with China and Russia, specifically those countries, Russia and China. And this division is not only about foreign policy, but also about cultural values. Reformists, since 1990s, under the presidency of Mohammad Khatami, tried to promote the ideas of civil liberties, for example. And the other group, conservatives, they tried to keep the traditional values. So they are divided in two aspects: foreign relationship with the different countries, which side should we support or we should make closer ties, Western countries or Eastern powers, China and Russia, and also to the cultural issues and civil liberties. So where does Brics come in? Actually, since 6 years ago, 5 years ago, this idea has been promoted that we should have a symbolic shift from the Western-led global order in Iran. That was the idea that the Supreme Leader supported, and also he was blessed by his ex-president, Ebrahim Raisi, who has died. But there are some main opportunities for Iran in Brics. First of all, you should know, the country holds the world's third largest oil and second largest gas reserves. Okay, and it makes us one of the most main oil-producing countries in the world, and gas also. In a simple sentence, if we can sell our oil and gas, we are happy. Very honest and direct. If you let us sell our oil and gas, we all can be happy, even me, So very direct and honest. And with countries like China and also India growing rapidly, Iran hopes to sell its gas and oil to new markets. We have this hope at least, and please buy oil from us. Moreover, I'm not sure if you know anything about the implementation of Joint Comprehensive Plan, Barjam. There was an agreement between Iran and the powerful and the Western countries like the United States, France, United Kingdom, Germany, and also China and Russia about the nuclear program. We call that Barjam. In the English term, it would be implementation of Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Even in that time, and you know, Donald Trump removed the United States from that agreement. Even in that time, sanctions that were related to SWIFT, they haven't been removed. So we stayed under the sanction. Although there was an agreement, Islamic Republic exceptionally followed its terms, and also Western powers testified that Iranian regime was faithful to that agreement. SWIFT's sanctions remained untouched. Islamic Republic has this hope that Brics Corporation could offer non-dollar trade options. This is the hope that Iranian regime always has, in order to reduce its dependency on US-controlled infrastructure. So if these countries can bring another, currency to the game, even me can be very happy. And if you just see the war that we had since 2 weeks ago with Israel, no established government supported Iran. This is very important to pay attention. Okay, not Russia, not Chinese government, no country, no established, I'm very focusing over this idea, established government, not groups, not societies, not people. No established government supported Iranian regime during the war. For example, President Putin mentioned that we have a lot of Hebrew speaker in Israel, and Israel shall be considered as a Russian speaking country. Yes, a speaking country. Yeah, that was the thing that he said. Being part of Brics could help Iran escape diplomatic isolation. At least this is the hope that Iranian government has, and it can be seen as a serious international player. But there are some, constraints. There are some barriers. First of all, we are living under sanctions. I think we are living under one of the best, well-organized sanctions that the country experienced in the history. So we are blessed in this regard. But this makes the situation very hard. When it's not only about that sanctions limit banking, trade, and also investment. But as a third country, you should always consider which country you want to have cooperation. With the United States, the biggest economy in the world, or Iran. Which one do you choose as a third country? So the sanctions are there, and until we cannot remove sanctions, we cannot be a useful part of any international agreement, at least secondo me, in my idea. Secondly, there are internal tensions in Brics. I don't want to refer to the territorial claim that China and India have over their lands, but even among oil-producing members like Iran, like Russia, like Saudi Arabia, it makes the situation, the real cooperation, very complicated. It was very common during the war that Russia is getting the interest, the benefit of this war, because both countries, Russia and Iran, they want to sell their oil to Chinese government, and now there is no Iran right there. Russia can sell its oil freely. So we should know that. And also, between Iran and Saudi Arabia, there was always huge tension. We can consider these countries as absolute enemies according to history. So they can control the tension, but we should always have this mind that these two powers in that region, they have some conflictual benefits and interests, and they always will have challenge in this regard. And most important for me, at least, unclear politics and unusual legal system that Iran has, it can make it a hard player to work with. You know, countries may speak positively about Iran, but they just want a stable government that they can negotiate with. For example, since the war has started 2 weeks ago, Iranian government told the Chinese engineers in the south part of Iran that they are not ready to pay them in this condition. And all those engineers left the country. And we all know that they will sue the government because they broke the clauses of the contract. So, Iranian government is not enough faithful to the agreement that it concludes because of the sanctions or its decisions. We are not sure about the reason. And they have an unusual legal system. Even in the European Union, what was the main idea of functionalism, you know? Let's become more similar to each other. Maybe a solution can be this, you know? Some hegemonic powers in Brics, like China, they can convince other countries to practice same legal system as possible as it can be imagined. For the final thoughts, if I have some minutes, 1 minute, I just want to be a bit normative. I just want to give some normative suggestions.
You can't resist.
You're
a philosopher.
Actually, you know, I just want to refer to my friend's sentence, Gabriele Massano. He gave a very beautiful suggestion. Instead of axis of resistance, maybe China can help us to establish axis of chilling. You know what? 2 years ago, there was a huge conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Who imposed, or in a more beautiful way, who convinced these countries to sit around the table and negotiate? China. The foreign minister of China came and took the hands of Iranian's foreign ministry and also Arabia, Saudi, and they sat on a table and they discussed their problems, and some of them has been solved. So as you can see, China can help us to establish the axis of chilling instead of resistance. China is an exception, actually. It possesses a very exceptional position in Brics and also for Iran. First of all, China shares no border with Iran, and I love this, actually. You know, common borders is not a good thing in the international world, okay? And I always prefer the hegemonic power that it is far from me. We have no common borders with China, but we have common borders with Russia, with the Caspian Sea. So, two countries have no colonial or military hostility in their shared past. We were always good with each other. You know, the ancient China, the ancient Persia. Cute, very cute. I believe that China has the power to influence Iran very positively. And how? First of all, they can help Iranian government to become a normalized country in the international level. Not completely normal, but normal as possible. And this is the power that China has, actually, because they did the same thing when there was a conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Moreover, we all know that Chinese approach is not interventionist, but maybe they can do this in a very smooth level, you know? For example, I just want to refer to the public mentality of Iranians. We consider Chinese very functional. It is very famous right now in Iran, if China is like a cat that can hunt the mouses, okay? The government's duty is hunt the mouses. So they have a very functional government. But if China can convince Iranian government to give more civil liberties to its people, I can guarantee that for centuries, Iranian people will love Chinese people, and it is taken for granted. And you may ask me wow, what will happen to your independence? Actually, I believe that we don't have any independent country right now except for China, Russia, and the United States, okay? The level of sovereignty is very low in these days. I cannot refer to any European country as sovereign, okay? This is my idea. And China has the power to help us in two aspects. First of all, or more, okay, for the conclusion. Just remember the case of Turkey. We always say that Turkish civil code had been practiced very well. And one of the reasons shall be mentioned here is the experts that they came to Turkey and they educated the judges and the lawyers. Maybe China can send some experts to Iran. Not only in the field of engineering, that you are really doing that, but also in legal fields, in legal aspects. And nobody can put this label over you that you are a part of Western-led orientation. I'm done. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very, very much, Hamid. This was an amazing, very inspirational talk. I thank you a lot. There is just one footnote that I would like to add in terms of terms that, when you describe conservatives versus reformists, that is a very, very neoliberal language. When you talk about conservatives, you always have to say what they want to conserve. And when you talk about reformists, you always have to know where they want to go. Because the same term reformist, when it was elaborated by Jeremy Bentham first, was a gentle, slow path in the direction of emancipation of some kind. Then it entered in the Fabian tradition. Also reformism had to do shifting power from the capital to the people. Okay? Reformism now in Europe became exactly the other way around. A reformist is someone that wants to create more market fundamentalism, more liberalism, more privatization. Those are the reformists. So in a context like this, such a contentious geopolitical context like Iran, I do not believe that that dubbing conservative those that prefer to have good relationships with Russia and China, as yourself are, can be seen as conservatives is not, within a clarification of the meaning of the concepts. Because reformists in a country like China, like Iran, as we have seen in many, even in Europe, in the European elections now, they talk about reformists, those that go to Brussels to receive orders. And they talk about reactionary fascist conservatives, those that care about the interest of their people. So we need to be very careful in a scholarly location like this, in which we are not making political statements, you just try to understand, to deploy the words in a way that are not heavily politically influenced in one way than the other. This is something that I tell to you because you usually deploy the term in that sense, but I know that it's not what you meant, but I'm just putting that as a general contribution for discussion. Many of these terms are loaded of imperialist ethos, and we have to be careful when we use them. So I think that now we are over with the morning session, and I think we have Professor UGO connected, yes? So we welcome him very warmly with an applause. And so before starting the discussion, which has already some people connected and some people that are going to talk from here, I'm going to do what I was supposed to do if Professor UGO had been in place, which is to bestow upon him the title of honorary professor at the International University College of Turin. Thank you very much, Professor UGO, for all your work. So I'm going to give, I didn't know who to give this little diploma that maybe you can then post on your wall or something. So I'm going to give you to the person that represented Brazil this morning, Professor Mariela Pitari, who is a Brazilian. I'm going to give her the diploma which I entrust her in order to deliver it to you at the first possible occasion, either in person or the way you guys are going to discuss. So thank you very much. Professor Unger, this is your diploma from the International University College. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure and an honor for me to hold your title, Professor Unger.